James Watt, by Andrew Carnegie. Chapter 9. Watt in Old Age. Watt gracefully glided into old age. This is the great test of success in life. To every stage a laurel, but to happy old age the crown. It was different with his friend Boulton, who continued to frequent the works and busy himself in affairs much as before, although approaching his 80th year. Watt could still occupy himself in his garret, where his mind to him a kingdom was, upon the scientific pursuits which charmed him. He revisited Paris in 1802 and renewed acquaintances with his old friends, with whom he spent 5 weeks. He frequently treated himself to tours throughout England, Scotland, and Wales. In the latter country he purchased a property which attracted him by its beauties, and which he greatly improved. It became at a later date under his son quite an extensive estate, much diversified, and not lacking altogether the stern grandeur of his native Scotland. He planted trees and took intense delight in his garden, being very fond of flowers. The farmhouse gave him a comfortable home upon his visits. The fine woods, which now richly clothe the valley and agreeably diversify the river and mountain scenery, were chiefly planted under his superintendence, many by his own hand. In short, the blood in his veins, the lessons of his childhood that made him a child of the mist, happy in roaming among the hills, reasserted their power in old age as the Celtic element powerfully does. He turned more and more to nature, that never yet betrayed the heart that loved her. We see him strolling through his woods, and imagine him crooning to himself from that marvelous memory that forgot no gem. For I have learned to look on nature, not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still, sad music of humanity, nor harsh, nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man. A motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. Therefore am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods and mountains, and of all that we behold from this green earth. Twice Watt was requested to undertake the honour of the shrievalty, in 1803 that of Staffordshire, and in 1816 that of Renfrewshire, both of which were positively declined. He finally found it necessary to declare that he was not a member of the Church of England, but of the Presbyterian Church of Scotland, a reason which in that day was conclusive. In 1816 he was in his 81st year, and no difficulty seems then to have been found for excusing him, for it seems the assumption of the duties was compulsory. It was the voice of age resistless in its feebleness. The day had come when Watt awakened to one of the saddest of all truths, that his friends were one by one rapidly passing away, the circle ever narrowing, the few whose places never could be filled becoming fewer, he in the centre left more and more alone. Nothing grieved Watt so much as this. In 1794 his partner Roebuck fell. In 1799 his inseparable friend and supporter in his hour of need, Dr. Black, and also Withering of the Lunar Society. And in 1802 Darwin of the Silver Song, one of his earliest English friends. In 1804 his brilliant son Gregory died, a terrible shock. In 1805 his first Glasgow College intimate, Robison. Dr. Beddoes in 1808. Boulton, his partner, in 1809, Dr. Wilson in 1811, De Luc in 1817. Many other friends of less distinction fell in these years who were not less dear to him. He says, "By one friend's withdrawing after another, he felt himself in danger of standing alone among strangers, the son of later times." He writes to Boulton on November 23, 1802, "We cannot help feeling, with deep regret, the circle of our old friends gradually diminishing, while our ability to increase it by new ones is equally diminished. But perhaps it is a wise dispensation of Providence so to diminish our enjoyments in this world, that when our turn comes we may leave it without regret." He writes to another correspondent July 12, 1810, "I, in particular, have reason to thank God that He has preserved me so well as I am, to so late a period, while the greater part of my contemporaries, healthier and younger men, have passed the bourne from which no traveller returns. It is, however, a painful contemplation to see so many who were dear to us pass away before us. and our consolation should be, that as Providence has been pleased to prolong our life, we should render ourselves as useful to society as we can while we live." And again, when 76 years of age, January, 1812, he writes, "On these subjects I can offer no other consolations than what are derived from religion. They have only gone before us a little while in that path we all must tread, and we should be thankful they were spared so long to their friends and the world." Sir Walter Scott declares, "That is the worst part of life, when its earlier path is trod. If my limbs get stiff, my walks are made shorter, and my rides slower. If my eyes fail me, I can use glasses and a large print. If I get a little deaf, I comfort myself that except in a few instances, I shall be no great loser by missing one full half of what is spoken. But I feel the loneliness of age when my companions and friends are taken from me." All his life, until retiring from business, Watt's care was to obtain sufficient for the support of himself and family upon the most modest scale. He had no surplus to devote to ends beyond self, but as soon as he retired with a small competence, it was different, and we accordingly find him promptly beginning to apply some portion of his still small revenue to philanthropical ends. Naturally, his thoughts reverted first to his native town and the university to which he owed so much. In 1808 he founded the Watt Prize in Glasgow University, saying, "Entertaining a due sense of the many favours conferred upon me by the University of Glasgow, I wish to leave them some memorial of my gratitude, and at the same time to excite a spirit of inquiry and exertion among the students of natural philosophy and chemistry attending the college, which appears to me the more useful, as the very existence of Britain as a nation seems to me in great measure to depend upon her exertions in science and in the arts." The University conferred the degree of LL.D. upon him in 1774, and its great engineering laboratory bears his name. In 1816 he made a donation to the town of Greenock for scientific books, stating it to be his intention to form the beginning of a scientific library for the instruction of the youth of Greenock, in the hope of prompting others to add to it, and of rendering his townsmen as eminent for their knowledge as they are for the spirit of enterprise. This has grown to be a library containing 15,000 volumes, and is a valuable adjunct of the Watt Institution, founded by his son in memory of his father, which is today the educational centre of Greenock. Its entrance is adorned by a remarkably fine statue of Watt, funds for which were raised by public subscription. Many societies honoured the great inventor. He was a Fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, the Royal Society of London, member of the Batavian Society, correspondent of the French Academy of Sciences, and was one of the 8 foreign associates of the French Academy of Sciences. Watt's most morbid dislike for publicity leaves many well-known acts of kindness and charity hidden from all save the recipients. Muirhead assures us that such gifts as we can well believe were not wanting. Watt's character as a kindly neighbor always stood high. He was one of those who will not receive a reward for that for which God accounts himself a debtor, persons that dare trust God with their charity, and without a witness. In the autumn of 1819, an illness of no great apparent severity caused some little anxiety to Watt's family, and was soon recognized by himself as the messenger sent to apprise him of his end. This summons he met with a calm and tranquil mind that, looking backward, could have found little of serious nature to repent, and looking forward found nothing to fear. He often expressed his gratitude to the Giver of all good, who had so signally prospered the work of his hands and blessed him with length of days and riches and honor. On August 19, 1819, aged 83, in his own home at Heathfield, he tranquilly breathed his last, deeply mourned by all who were privileged to know him. In the parish churchyard alongside of Bolton, he was most appropriately laid to rest. Thus the 2 strong men, lifelong friends and partners, who had never had a serious difference, lovely and pleasant in their lives, in their death were not divided. It may be doubted whether there be on record so charming a business connection as that of Boulton and Watt. In their own increasingly close union for 25 years, and, at its expiration, in the renewal of that union in their sons under the same title, in their sons' close union as friends without friction as in the first generation, in the wonderful progress of the world resulting from their works, In their lying down side by side in death upon the bosom of Mother Earth in the quiet churchyard, as they had stood side by side in the battle of life, and in the faithful servant Murdoch joining them at the last, as he had joined them in his prime. In the sweet and precious influences which emanate from all this, may we not gratefully make acknowledgment that in contemplation thereof we are lifted into a higher atmosphere, refreshed, encouraged, and bettered by the true story of men like ourselves, whom if we can never hope to equal, we may at least try in part to imitate. A meeting was called in London to take steps for a monument to Watt to be placed in Westminster Abbey. The Prime Minister presided and announced a subscription of £500 sterling from his Majesty. It may be truly said that a meeting more distinguished by rank, station, and talent was never before assembled to do honour to genius, and to modest and retiring worth, and a more spontaneous, noble, and discriminating testimony was never borne to the virtues, talents, and public services of any individual in any age or country. The result was the colossal statue by Chantrey, which bears the following inscription, pronounced to be beyond comparison the finest lapidary inscription in the English language. It is from the pen of Lord Brougham: "Not to perpetuate a name which must endure while the peaceful arts flourish, but to shew that mankind have learnt to honour those who best deserve their gratitude, the King, his ministers, and many of the nobles and commoners of the realm raised this monument to James Watt, who, directing the force of an original genius, early exercised in philosophic research to the improvement of the steam engine, enlarged the resources of his country, increased the power of man, and rose to an eminent place among the most illustrious followers of science, and the real benefactors of the world. Born at Greenock, 1736, died at Heathfield in Staffordshire, 1819. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. Watt, the Inventor and Discoverer. In the foregoing pages an effort has been made to follow and describe Watt's work in detail as it was performed, but we believe our readers will thank us for presenting the opinions of a few of the highest scientific and legal authorities upon what Watt really did. Lord Brougham has this to say of Watt: "One of the most astonishing circumstances in this truly great man was the versatility of his talents. His accomplishments were so various, the powers of his mind were so vast, and yet of such universal application, that it was hard to say whether we should most admire the extraordinary grasp of his understanding, or the accuracy of nice research with which he could bring it to bear upon the most minute objects of investigation. I forget of whom it was said that his mind resembled the trunk of an elephant, which can pick up straws and tear up trees by the roots. Mr. Watt in some sort resembled the greatest and most celebrated of his own inventions, of which we are at a loss whether most to wonder at the power of grappling with the mightiest objects, or of handling the most minute; so that while nothing seems too large for its grasp, nothing seems too small for the delicacy of its touch, which can cleave rocks and pour forth rivers from the bowels of the earth, and with perfect exactness, though not with greater ease, fashion the head of a pin, or strike the impress of some curious die. Now those who knew Mr. Watt had to contemplate a man whose genius could create such an engine, and indulge in the most abstruse speculations of philosophy, and could at once pass from the most sublime researches of geology and physical astronomy, the formation of our globe, and the structure of the universe, to the manufacture of a needle or a nail, who could discuss in the same conversation, and with equal accuracy, if not the same consummate skill, the most forbidding details of art, and the elegances of classical literature, the most abstruse branches of science, and the niceties of verbal criticism. There was one quality in Mr. Watt which most honourably distinguished him from too many inventors, and was worthy of all imitation. He was not only entirely free from jealousy, but he exercised a careful and scrupulous self-denial, and was anxious not to appear, even by accident, as appropriating to himself that which he thought belonged in part to others. I have heard him refuse the honour universally ascribed to him of being inventor of the steam engine, and call himself simply its improver, though in my mind to doubt his right to that honour would be as inaccurate as to question Sir Isaac Newton's claim to his greatest discoveries, because Descartes in mathematics and Galileo in astronomy and mechanics had preceded him, or to deny the merits of his illustrious successor because galvanism was not his discovery, though before his time it had remained as useless to science as the instrument called a steam engine was to the arts before Mr. Watt. The only jealousy I have known him betray was with respect to others, in the nice adjustment he was fond of giving to the claims of inventors. Justly prizing scientific discovery above all other possessions, he deemed the title to it so sacred that you might hear him arguing by the hour to settle disputed rights, and if you ever perceived his temper ruffled, it was when one man's invention was claimed by, or given to, another, or when a clumsy adulation pressed upon himself that which he knew to be not his own. Sir Humphry Davy says, "I consider it as a duty incumbent on me to endeavour to set forth his peculiar and exalted merits, which live in the recollection of his contemporaries and will transmit his name with immortal glory to posterity." Those who consider James Watt only as a great practical mechanic form a very erroneous idea of his character. He was equally distinguished as a natural philosopher and a chemist, and his inventions demonstrate his profound knowledge of those sciences, and that peculiar characteristic of genius, the union of them for practical application. The steam engine before his time was a rude machine, the result of simple experiments on the compression of the atmosphere and the condensation of steam. Mr. Watt's improvements were not produced by accidental circumstances or by a single ingenious thought. They were founded on delicate and refined experiments, connected with the discoveries of Dr. Black. He had to investigate the cause of the cold produced by evaporation, of the heat occasioned by the condensation of steam, to determine the source of the air appearing when water was acted upon by an exhausting power, the ratio of the volume of steam to its generating water, and the law by which the elasticity of steam increased with the temperature. Labour, time, numerous and difficult experiments were required for the ultimate result, and when his principle was obtained, the application of it to produce the movement of machinery demanded a new species of intellectual and experimental labour. The Archimedes of the ancient world by his mechanical inventions arrested the course of the Romans, and stayed for a time the downfall of his country. How much more has our modern Archimedes done? He has permanently elevated the strength and wealth of his great empire, and, during the last long war, his inventions and their application were amongst the great means which enabled Britain to display power and resources so infinitely above what might have been expected from the numerical strength of her population. Archimedes valued principally abstract science. James Watt, on the contrary, brought every principle to some practical use, and as it were, made science descend from heaven to earth. The great inventions of the Syracusan died with him. Those of our philosopher live, and their utility and importance are daily more felt. They are among the grand results which place civilized above savage man, which secure the triumph of intellect and exalt genius and moral force over mere brutal strength, courage, and numbers. Sir James Mackintosh says, "It may be presumptuous in me to add anything in my own words to such just and exalted praise. Let me rather borrow the language in which the great father of modern philosophy, Lord Bacon himself, has spoken of inventors in the arts of life. In a beautiful, though not very generally read, fragment of his, called the New Atlantis, a voyage to an imaginary island, he has imagined a university, or rather royal society, under the name of Solomon's House, or the College of the 6 Days' Works, and among the various buildings appropriated to this institution, he describes a gallery destined to contain the statues of inventors. He does not disdain to place in it not only the inventor of one of the greatest instruments of science, but the discoverer of the use of the silkworm, and of other still more humble contrivances for the comfort of man. What place would Lord Bacon have assigned in such a gallery to the statue of Mr. Watt? Is it too much to say that, considering the magnitude of the discoveries, the genius and science necessary to make them, and the benefits arising from them to the world, that statue must have been placed at the head of those of all inventors in all ages and nations? In another part of his writings, the same great man illustrates the dignity of useful inventions by one of those happy allusions to the beautiful mythology of the ancients, which he often employs to illuminate as well as to decorate reason. "The dignity," says he, "of this end of endowment of man's life with new commodity appeareth by the estimation that antiquity made of such as guided thereto. For whereas founders of states, lawgivers, extirpators of tyrants, fathers of the people, were honoured but with the titles of demigods, inventors were ever consecrated amongst the gods themselves." The Earl of Aberdeen says, "It would ill become me to attempt to add to the eulogy which you have already heard on the distinguished individual whose genius and talents we have met this day to acknowledge. That eulogy has been pronounced by those whose praises are well calculated to confer honour, even upon him whose name does honour to his country. I feel in common with them, although I can but ill express that intense admiration which the bare recollection of those discoveries must excite, which have rendered us familiar with a power before nearly unknown, and which have taught us to wield, almost at will, perhaps the mightiest instrument ever entrusted to the hands of man. I feel, too, that in erecting a monument to his memory, placed as it may be among the memorials of kings and heroes, and statesmen, and philosophers, that it will be then in its proper place, and most in its proper place, if in the midst of those who have been most distinguished by their usefulness to mankind, and by the spotless integrity of their lives." Lord Jeffrey says, "This name fortunately needs no commemoration of ours, for he that bore it survived to see it crowned with undisputed and unenvied honours, and many generations will probably pass away before it shall have gathered all its fame. We have said that Mr. Watt was the great improver of the steam engine, but in truth, as to all that is admirable in its structure or vast in its utility, he should rather be described as its inventor. It was by his inventions that its action was so regulated, as to make it capable of being applied to the finest and most delicate manufactures, and its power so increased as to set weight and solidity at defiance. By his admirable contrivance, it has become a thing stupendous alike for its force and its flexibility, for the prodigious power which it can exert, and the ease and precision and ductility with which it can be varied, distributed, and applied. The trunk of an elephant, that can pick up a pin or rend an oak, is as nothing to it. It can engrave a seal, and crush masses of obdurate metal before it; draw out, without breaking, a thread as fine as gossamer, and lift a ship of war like a bauble in the air. It can embroider muslin and forge anchors, cut steel into ribbons, and impel loaded vessels against the fury of the winds and the waves." It would be difficult to estimate the value of the benefits which these inventions have conferred upon this country. There is no branch of industry that has not been indebted to them; and, in all the most material, they have not only widened most magnificently the field of its exertions, but multiplied 1,000-fold the amount of its productions. It is our improved steam engine that has fought the battles of Europe, and exalted and sustained, through the late tremendous contest, the political greatness of our land. It is the same great power which now enables us to pay the interest of our debt, and to maintain the arduous struggle in which we are still engaged (1819), with the skill and capital of countries less oppressed with taxation. But these are poor and narrow views of its importance. It has increased indefinitely the mass of human comforts and enjoyments, and rendered cheap and accessible all over the world the materials of wealth and prosperity. It has armed the feeble hand of man, in short, with a power to which no limits can be assigned, completed the dominion of mind over the most refractory qualities of matter, and laid a sure foundation for all those future miracles of mechanical power which are to aid and reward the labors of after generations. It is to the genius of one man, too, that all this is mainly owing, and certainly no man ever bestowed such a gift on his kind. The blessing is not only universal, but unbounded, and the fabled inventors of the plough and the loom, who were deified by the erring gratitude of their rude contemporaries, conferred less important benefits on mankind than the inventor of our present steam engine. This will be the fame of Watt with future generations, and it is sufficient for his race and his country. But to those to whom he more immediately belonged, who lived in his society and enjoyed his conversation, it is not perhaps the character in which he will be most frequently recalled, most deeply lamented, or even most highly admired. We shall end by quoting the greatest living authority, Lord Kelvin, now Lord Chancellor of Glasgow University, which Watt and he have done so much to render famous. Precisely that single-acting, high-pressure syringe engine, made and experimented on by James Watt 140 years ago in his Glasgow College workshop, now, in 1901, with the addition of a surface condenser cooled by air to receive the waste steam, and a pump to return the water thence to the boiler, constitutes the common road motor, which, in the opinion of many good judges, is the most successful of all the different motors which have been made and tried within the last few years. Without a condenser, Watt's high-pressure, single-acting engine of 1761 only needs the cylinder cover with piston rod passing steam-tight through it, as introduced by Watt himself in subsequent developments, and the valves proper for admitting steam on both sides of the piston and for working expansively, to make it the very engine which, during the whole of the past century, has done practically all the steam work of the world, and is doing it still, except on the sea or lakes or rivers where there is plenty of condensing water. Even the double and triple and quadruple expansion engines, by which the highest modern economy for power in steam engines has been obtained, are splendid mechanical developments of the principle of expansion, discovered and published by Watt, and used, though to a comparatively limited extent, in his own engines. Thus, during the 5 years, from 1761 to 1766, Watt had worked out all the principles and invented all that was essential in the details for realizing them in the most perfect steam engines of the present day. So passes Watt from view as the discoverer and inventor of the most powerful instrument in the hands of man to alter the face of the physical world. He takes his place at the head of all inventors of all ages and all nations.